Harvester is, without a doubt, the video game of all time. We open with our protagonist, Steve Mason, waking up in his bedroom in what seems to be an average American town. He has no memories and no idea where he is or what's going on. He does, however, recognize that everything is really fucking weird. After exiting his room, he finds his little brother watching a show on TV that's depicting what appears to be actual murder, while his mom is in the kitchen repeatedly baking cookies and then throwing them away. When he asks about what's going on, he gets responses indicating that this is all normal, that he's the weird one. Why wouldn't she throw the cookies away? The charity event she's baking them for is still days away. It just makes sense. To everyone else in the town of Harvest, Steve's the weird one. All of the goofy bullshit happening there is easy to understand. Everyone knows what the lodge is and why it's so important. To them, either something's wrong with Steve or he's just kidding around. Which is why, whenever Steve asks about all the nonsense he encounters throughout the game, everyone always responds with the same line.
Well, you always were a kidder, Steve.
You always were a kidder, Steve.
Well, you always were such a kidder, Steve.
After all, there's no way anyone's experience could be different from the majority. If anyone claims otherwise, they're either confused or lying, right? Right? I don't exactly keep it a secret that I'm non-binary. I tend to present myself as primarily feminine, though I also don't feel much need to change my voice or body to fit that presentation because despite not identifying as the gender I was assigned at birth, I also don't feel particularly like a woman either, at least not completely. I find that this is hard for most people to wrap their heads around, and I get why. Gender is typically viewed as a spectrum, at least by people with functioning brains, where you're somewhere between masculine and feminine. Each person has an intrinsic understanding of where they fall on that spectrum and feels most comfortable when presenting in line with that. It's a feeling that most people seem to have, so how could I ever begin to explain that I just don't? The only time that I think about gender in relation to myself is when I'm asked about my identity. Probably 99% of my entire life, I just view myself as a person. Am I a man? Am I a woman? I don't know, dog. I just want to train my Umamusumes.
That seems like a strange thing to warn somebody.
Even before I was old enough to know anything about the conversation surrounding gender, I didn't really factor perceived manliness into what I did and didn't like. For example, there's never been a point in my life where I didn't have at least a handful of stuffed animals in my bed. Not exactly groundbreaking stuff, but from what I've heard from others, most cis men either grew out of things like that, or they got rid of them because they worry about how other people would perceive it. I didn't care though, they're cute, I like them. They're silly little guys. The same concept applies to things I didn't like. As you might expect, most of the friends I had when I was younger were gamers. When you think about what the average cisgender guy plays, especially in the 2000s and early 2010s, your mind probably jumps to either first-person shooters, EA Sports titles, or Dota 2 if the cis men in your life are freaks. Or maybe that's just my personal hyper-specific experience? Anyway, I quickly grew bored of all of those, and within a few years, I was playing Project Diva and cosplaying female characters, while everyone who used to be in my life was falling for military recruitment ads and manosphere content.
You look like you're really into this. You guys want a real challenge?
Now, I don't bring all of this up to imply that your interests define your gender or your path in life. They very obviously do not. But it also can't be understated how much social pressure plays a role in how people act based on their gender identity. To see what I mean, just look at any gendered product. It's commonly understood, at least in places where Western colonialism had an influence, that girls love dolls and makeup, and boys love sports and fighting. These certainly aren't true across the board, and I say this purely based on my own experiences and not comprehensive research, but it does tend to be accurate a lot of the time, and I think at least a decent bit of that is caused by cultural suggestion. After all, if you never let a boy play with dolls or dress up like a princess, how would he ever know for sure that he doesn't like it? But the thing about that is, those sorts of things, that social pressure, never really worked on me the way they seem to work on most people. And that's why this is such a hard thing for me to accurately describe. Most people seem to just understand what a man or a woman is, know where they fall between those two options, and present accordingly. And now, as governments are increasingly pushing public opinion towards falling in line with these cultural ideas of what gender is, I find myself feeling like Steve Mason, being confused by something that everyone else just knows. Oh, you can't define your own gender? You always were a kidder, Ezra. There's something comforting to me about games that are set in surreal worlds, to the point where I wish I could visit them in real life. For example, pretty much any location in LSD Dream Emulator looks like a place where I would enjoy hitting the pendulum and going nonverbal for 8 hours. I'm not necessarily sure comfort's the right word to use, though. There's not many places in games like LSD or Hylics that one would call cozy in a traditional sense, but there's something freeing about existing in a world where things don't make sense, and you can just accept that without stressing about it because the uncertainty is the point. It does depend on the game, though. Not all surreal games are designed to be scary. I've just mentioned a couple that aren't. But Harvester certainly is, or at least as scary as a point-and-click horror game from the 90s can be. There are, of course, plenty of other horror tropes in the game that aren't necessarily surreal, but a large part of the scare factor comes from the nonsense that Steve experiences. Steve doesn't understand why everyone in town is a freak, and the freaks don't understand why Steve isn't a freak. This works because of how the world is presented. By appearances alone, it's clear that Harvest is meant to be a normal-ass town in Texas. The player would expect people in that type of town to behave like humans, so when they don't, they end up aligned with Steve's fear, caught in a situation they should understand but don't. I do not want to hit the pendulum and go nonverbal in Harvest. Compare this to Hylics, where everything appears so far removed from the reality that we live in that we have no prior experiences to draw from. And I think it's that lack of knowledge and expectation that I find comforting by comparison. We've figured out a lot of things in our real world. We humans, and burbs, for some reason we have a built-in desire to figure everything out, to be able to define and label everything that happens to us and around us. There are, however, a lot of things that we still don't fully understand, and might not ever fully understand, gender being one of them. However, rather than admit that we don't know, it's becoming increasingly clear that many people would prefer to act like we do know. We don't understand everything about gender, so let's just use what little understanding we do have to slap a predefined list of labels on it and be weird about it when someone comes up with a new one. Non-binary girl balls. And to be clear here, I am primarily talking about transphobes here, but this also applies to people who are weird about neo-pronouns and other less common gender expressions. If you're one of those types of people, I have to ask, why does it matter? But with this context in mind, it makes a lot more sense why I'd prefer to kick it in Hylics instead of Harvest. Harvest exists in a predefined framework for how things should be, so it would be near impossible to exist outside of the predefined rules without consequences. Not only is Harvest in Texas, a place that isn't super happy that non-binary people exist to begin with, but all the people there already have trouble accepting an amnesiac. There's no way a non-binary person would be accepted. Hylics, on the other hand, doesn't seem all that rough. Like, are you really gonna look me in the eyes and tell me Pongorma cares what a gender is? That's what I thought. That's what I thought. Hylics is a game that defies any kind of understanding. Upon starting the game, you're presented with a brief, confusingly worded poem before waking up as the protagonist, Wayne, in probably his house? You can watch TV to learn a skill, you can take a bath, you can talk to your weird-ass cat, and a number of other things that probably don't matter or mean anything. After exploring for a bit, you'll eventually make your way to a town in the east where you can find NPCs who can maybe give you a bit of direction. Okay, never mind. Turns out, most NPC dialogue in this game is randomly generated. I don't need to describe everything that happens from this point, both because it's not why I'm discussing this game, and also because I think you should play this for yourself. But to quickly summarize, you'll travel around the world to recruit 3 more party members, Datasmoln, Samsnosa, and Pongorma. Then, you go to the moon and kill Gibby, who's the bad guy, I think. Weird things will happen during the journey. You'll perform a concert with all your homies, encounter multiple meat monsters, and at some point, you'll probably die in combat. When this happens, you're sent to the afterlife, where some fish will tell you how to do some things. For instance, one of them tells you that you can convert meat into flesh points at the machine. Sure, buddy. It was right, though. You can convert meat into flesh points at the machine. What a world we live in, huh? Also, we can just touch a crystal and then be revived by going through a portal. I guess everyone's immortal in this universe. I don't fucking know, man. Now, most people who play games that aren't straightforward with their world building are compelled to try and piece things together. And I'm usually no exception, but I didn't feel the need to with Hylics. I'm sure people have. And I don't necessarily think that's the wrong way to engage with Hylics, but it does tie into what I'm talking about here. Why do we feel compelled to piece everything together? Why do we feel like we'll be better off if we understand how everything in Hylics works and what it means? Doesn't that take away from the experience a little bit? Maybe it's just me, but I felt like I quite enjoyed the experience of an open-ended RPG with minimal explanation. I just had to go with the flow, and everything I stumbled into was new and exciting. Trying to analyze everything that happened in this 3-hour fever dream would just feel like work to me, and I wouldn't really gain anything from it. In fact, it may make it worse. I may start noticing plot holes and contradictions that I didn't before. My opinion of the thing may become worse if I could point out things I thought were wrong. That said, this game does still mean something to me, and I'm going to tell you about it because I'm a pretentious video essayist. How does the world of Hylics really differ from our own? I mean, we can perform at concerts, we do encounter multiple meat monsters every day, and we can be killed in combat. More broadly though, suppose you woke up in the real world one day with no knowledge of what anything is. I have to imagine the experience would be quite similar to playing Hylics for the first time. Here's all these existing things, a system of cause and effect holding them together, but no context for why, how, or what. That's what humans went through many thousands of years ago, right? And we only ended up here with the cultural idea that not conforming to gender is weird and gross because we assign meaning to shit that doesn't matter. Just because having a meaning made us uncomfortable, I guess. Hylics and games like it are comfort food to me because they let me, for a brief period of time, imagine a world where nobody cares about my gender and everyone just vibes out. Why don't we just do that instead? Wouldn't it be easier? Why do you need to know my gender anyway? Are you trying to sleep with me? Get the fuck out of my house. Now, I don't necessarily deny the existence of gender as a part of the human experience just because I don't understand it. It's quite clear that it means something to a lot of people, and I have no interest in whether or not it's a social construct. I do, however, reject the idea that it matters to me or anyone else how a given person experiences it. You were born with a dick and say you're a man? Fucking sick. Do you want to play Mahjong with me? You were born with a vagina and say you're a man? Also fucking sick. Do you want to play Mahjong with me? If you tell me your gender identity, what right do I have to question it at all? It's so clearly something that everyone feels and interprets differently, informed by their own experiences and sense of self. And even if it wasn't, should it really matter anyway? Is the implication then that some natural law dictates that we should treat men and women differently? Fuck no. Man, woman, eldritch abomination, or other option. I just want to play Mahjong with you. Please, please play Mahjong with me. I like Mahjong a lot. I like this game a normal amount. I bring all this up because my confusion isn't really about not understanding gender. I don't understand gender, and I fully believe nobody does beyond their own sense of self. My confusion is in the way people get so weird about it. I simply respect the pronouns of the people around me, as do most people I'm friends with. That's the correct way to go about it, the obvious way to go about it. And yet, we find ourselves as the Steve Masons of the world, the ones who are treated as weird and wrong, the ones who aren't believed. The kidders, if you will. On October 14th, 2025, a Twitter shitass posted a bunch of charts and data that, according to him, showed a large decline in the amount of trans people since 2023. A lot of people took this at face value, presumably in the hopes of winning the confirmation bias world championship, but there's a lot of obvious flaws. Not for nothing, the shitass's conclusion was quickly debunked by a different Twitter shitass, but not many people seem to have noticed this, so we'll act like it didn't happen and address a different problem. Survey data, which this post relied on, depends on self-identification. Now this may come as a shock, you may want to sit down for this, but people can lie when they're responding to surveys, especially when there's a good reason to. Can you think of any good reasons why a trans person may lie about being trans on a survey? Maybe because our current government is villainizing trans people? Editor, roll the clip.
If it is false, then for the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. The whole preposterous ideology.
Editor, remove this man's balls. With it being extremely risky to exist as a gender non-conforming person right now, it really shouldn't surprise anyone that less people are being open about their identities. It's also likely people aren't even discovering their identities for fear of harm. What if you live in a red state with an extremely conservative family and happen to discover that you're trans? Almost certainly nothing good is going to come from that situation. What I would argue is actually happening here is that since conservatives are so against learning or changing, they would rather bully us into hiding than pat themselves on the back for fixing the problem. This isn't new by any stretch. One of the first Nazi book burnings was the burning of the Institute for Sexual Research's library in 1933. This institute studied topics regarding sexuality, including homosexuality, transgender identities, and intersex people. The Nazis would later round up anyone they could find that fit into these categories of research and send them to camps to be tortured and killed. Do you suppose many trans people in Nazi Germany would have told a researcher in a survey that they were trans? I get that this example may seem extreme, the USA isn't doing this yet, and hopefully it never will, but this isn't exactly ancient history. It's probably on a lot of people's minds right now, and I know it's certainly on mine. You know what is ancient history, though? Trans people. In the interest of time, I won't list every single example of trans identities throughout history, because there's just way too many to go over here, but here's some examples. The Nuba peoples of Sudan had male-assigned individuals who lived like women. There's archaeological evidence of Native Americans in the California area who lived outside their assigned gender as far back as 2,500 years ago. The public universal friend existed in colonial America. Ancient Greeks and Romans were trans as fuck. They even had bottom surgery. We're not a social trend. We're not a fad. We exist. We've existed for a long time. Nobody's ever been able to get rid of us, and this time won't be any different. If you still believe that we don't exist, and you somehow haven't clicked off, I'd like you to answer this question, and I'm being so for real. Why do you care so much? In the games I've discussed in this video so far, I could point to actual reasons that they might make players uncomfortable. But, as far as I can tell, the only reason for trans and non-binary people to make you uncomfortable is because we're different from what you've been told a man or a woman is. But doesn't that stress you out a little bit? If you just decided that it didn't matter, not only would it make our lives easier, but it would make yours easier too. We're born into this strange, confusing world that we still know almost nothing about. We try our best to make sense of it for about a century, and then we die. Why do you insist on holding on to rules and definitions created by dead people? Why is it bad if I don't follow them? I'm not asking you to become trans or non-binary. As I said earlier, I don't care if you are or not, I just want to play mahjong with you. I just don't get it. Why do you care so much? Alright, this video is supposed to be about surreal games. Let's get back to that. Discopup is a surreal time loop adventure game that was recently released on Steam. I'll avoid as many spoilers as I can because it's neat and you should play it, but here's the basics. You play as Yuri, a seal who wants to get into a nightclub. That nightclub, however, does not let in anyone who's not a dog. Your goal is to find a combination of clothes that will trick the bouncer into thinking you're a dog so he'll let you inside. As a non-binary person, I found this premise very relatable. As I've described, people generally expect others to act and dress in certain ways if they want to be accepted in their gender identity. Similarly, the Discopup nightclub expects people to act and dress in certain ways to be accepted onto the dance floor. No matter how you manage to get past the bouncer in the game, you will be required to wear a mask. After finding one that worked and getting into the nightclub, something stood out to me. All of the people there were also wearing masks. None of them were real dogs. Not only that, they were all wearing the same exact mask. Their only identifiable traits were hidden under the cut and paste lie they used to get into the party. Men, as a concept, are expected to have well-defined muscles, are aggressive, and avoid showing emotion at all costs. Women, as a concept, are expected to be small, agreeable, and emotional. Any deviation from this is punished, causing people to hide their actual personalities, putting on a mask to be viewed as what they are. Anyone who isn't cisgender has it worse. The bar for acceptance is set way higher, to the point where even cis people, women especially, are accused of being trans for having the wrong body type. For example, women who have visible collarbones. Are you starting to see why this is a problem for everyone yet? According to society, it's also possible to go too far though. One of the ways you can get into Discopup is to find a mask made of what appears to be a whole-ass real dog, arguably the most realistic and convincing disguise you can come across, although also the most disgusting. When you finish the night with this mask, you get a scene where you dance alone, with everyone else staring on with horror and disgust. Or at least I have to assume so, given the masks make it hard to tell. Members of our community who choose to change their bodies in order to conform to the ideal version of their gender are viewed as disgusting by many, fetishized by many others. Even when changing everything to be exactly what our culture says they should be, even that's not enough. Even that's a horrible thing. It's called mutilation. It's described as lying to potential partners. It's inherently sexualized, even when it has nothing to do with sex. Gender-affirming surgery isn't wearing mutilated skin, though. There's no justifiable explanation for any normal person to be upset about it, and yet it's all too common. There's simply no winning with these people. That's all just my read of the game, though. It doesn't have to be yours, but I found it interesting and helpful to share. And that's the great thing about games, especially surreal ones, isn't it? There's so many different ways to play and interpret them. For instance, Discopup draws heavy inspiration from The King in Yellow, which made me think of Signalis, another surreal horror game with the same inspiration. Many people, including myself, interpret that game as a story involving LGBT relationships. But since the story isn't presented in a straightforward way, you don't have to interpret it that way. I could probably return to my discussion on Hylics and find a way to interpret parts of the plot in direct relation to gender identity, but like I said earlier, I don't really want to. That isn't something I actively seek out in games, in the same way I'm not all that interested in putting a specific label on my gendered real life. Perhaps these interpretations stand out to me because of my own lived experiences, but ultimately they shouldn't matter to you unless you care about them that way. And that's the point of this video, really. We live in a surreal world that we've tried desperately over centuries to make less surreal. But at the end of the day, we're all just making it up as we go. Forcing masks onto people, casting doubt onto people, and trying to add our own meaning to their personal journey just makes things worse for everyone. Just like video games, though, other people's interpretations of their real-life experiences shouldn't matter to you, shouldn't be taken as fact in your life. Neither I, nor most trans and non-binary people, have any desire to make other people trans or non-binary. We've simply discovered who we are, and we choose to be proud of it. This presents no danger to others, and anyone who gets upset about it is a fool and a weirdo who belongs in Harvest. If that's you, consider getting off my girl cock and finishing your own self-discovery journey. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go convert meat into flesh points at the machine. Thanks for watching.